Part 1. Introduction. The cold case from the past. Picture a bedroom lit by a trembling candle. Outside, the wind scrapes the walls, and on a thin window pane, frost spreads like white veins. Winter drawing its own map. Now imagine this isn't a scene, it's your real night. In the late 1800s, you're lying in a room so cold you can see your breath. There's no thermostat to turn up, no electric blanket to plug in. Your walls are stone or early timber materials that act like a thermal sponge, soaking up the last scraps of warmth, then bleeding them into the frozen dark. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You already know this feeling. Because even today, you can wake at 3 a.m. with your teeth chattering while the heater is still running. You add blankets, you pull everything tighter, yet that radiant chill still slips through, quietly, stubbornly, like the cold has found a direct path into your bones. Our grandparents knew this problem well. To them, a cold house wasn't an emergency, it was life. And the mystery is this: they often slept warmer than we do now. Not because they were tougher. People back then shivered too. They suffered, they dreaded long nights, but they survived because they were smarter with space and air. They followed a quiet set of rules, disciplined, almost ritual-like, what we can call thermodynamic discipline. They understood something we've forgotten. Warmth isn't only about making heat, it's about protecting the heat you already have. A few inches of placement, a pocket of trapped air, a barrier between your body and a cold surface, a decision to stop fighting an entire room and instead defend the human body like a fortress. And that's what we're uncovering today. We're stepping into a hidden world of historical ingenuity, from the survival pods of medieval Europe to the thermal batteries of ancient China, revealing bedroom hacks used before 1950 that can still cut heating costs and change the way you sleep. So here's the question. Are you ready to rethink your bedroom? Because a small adjustment, measured in inches, not feet, might change your winter nights forever. Welcome to Historia Prime. Part 2. The Golden Rule. Interior walls versus exterior walls. If there is one rule our ancestors almost never broke, it was this: the bed belongs on an interior wall, not an exterior one. That sounds like a small decorating choice, the kind of thing you'd ignore while rearranging furniture. But in the world before fiberglass insulation and airtight drywall, it was a survival decision. Back then, exterior walls weren't walls the way we think of them today. They were cold sinks heat magnets. They absorbed warmth from the room and poured it outward into the night. And modern measurements explain why this still matters. Even if your room air sits comfortably around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the surface of an uninsulated exterior wall can drop to around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not just a little cooler. That is a silent ice plate hiding in plain sight. So if your headboard is pressed against that wall, your body becomes the heater. All night long, your core warmth radiates into the wall, and the wall takes it slowly, relentlessly, like a giant block of ice stealing heat without making a sound. You can pile on blankets and still wake up cold, because the problem isn't the blanket. The problem is the heat drain right behind you. And here's the insight our grandparents understood without thermometers or textbooks. They didn't put beds where they looked best. They put beds where they worked best. They instinctively chose interior walls, walls that backed onto a hallway, a kitchen, or another bedroom, because those spaces shared warmth. Instead of bleeding heat into the outdoors, the wall returned it. That created a stable microclimate, fewer cold drafts, less radiant chill, and a room that didn't feel like it was fighting you. So what's the lesson for today? You don't need to rebuild your house to feel the difference. Sometimes you only need to move your bed. Shifting it just 12 to 18 inches away from an outside wall, especially your headboard, can cut down how often you feel forced to use a space heater. by the equivalent of 50 to 70 hours a month. And once you know this, you can't unsee it. So take a look tonight, before you sleep. Where is your headboard resting? Against comfort or against the cold? Part 3. The Lake of Ice. Why elevation was survival. Have you ever noticed how high old-fashioned beds were? Not just a little taller, but tall enough that people kept step stools beside them, like they were climbing a small mountain just to go to sleep. And for a long time, we've told ourselves it was about style, or storage, or hiding a chamber pot. But the real reason was far more serious. They were escaping a silent killer that still exists in your home today. Something physics calls thermal stratification. Here's the rule: warm air rises and cold air sinks. Simple. But in a drafty cottage or an under-insulated room, that simple rule becomes a nightly trap. The air separates into layers, almost like invisible water. Up higher, it's warmer. Down low, near the floor, a dense pool of cold air forms and just sits there. A lake of ice. And if you sleep too close to that lake, on a low mattress or directly on the floor, your body spends the entire night losing heat downward. You're not only fighting the temperature of the room, you're fighting the cold reservoir collecting beneath you, pulling warmth by conduction like the floor is drinking it. That's why ancestral beds were often raised 8, 12, even 20 inches, because lifting yourself just 1 foot changes your entire climate. You move into a different thermal layer where the air is measurably warmer and far less punishing. And there was another benefit they understood through hard experience. Elevation lets air circulate under the mattress, which helps prevent moisture buildup, one of the hidden causes of mold, rot, and that clammy, cold feeling that never seems to leave. So the lesson for today is brutally practical. If you're setting up a guest room in a garage, sleeping in a drafty cabin, or preparing for a winter power outage, the worst place you can put a mattress is on the floor. Get off the ground. Use a bed frame, a pallet, a sturdy platform, anything that breaks that direct contact with the cold. And if you have nothing else, even thick layers beneath the mattress, blankets, folded quilts, cardboard under a rug, can interrupt that heat theft. Because once you understand this, you realize something unsettling. In winter, the floor is not neutral. The floor is a heat sink. And elevation isn't comfort, it's survival. Part 4. The Medieval Survival Pod, the box bed. Now we step into the realm of true historical engineering, where furniture stops being decoration and becomes a weapon against winter. Meet the box bed. In Brittany, it was called the lit clo. In the Netherlands, the bedstee. Different names, same idea, and the first time you see one, it can feel almost unsettling. To modern eyes, it looks less like a bed and more like a cupboard. A wooden box built into the wall, a door you can close, a space that seems too small to be comfortable. But for hundreds of years, families didn't sleep in wide-open rooms the way we do now. They climbed into these enclosures and shut themselves in, and the reason was painfully logical. In a drafty medieval home, trying to heat the entire room with firewood was like trying to warm the sky with a match. So instead, they did something smarter. They stopped fighting the whole room, and they heated the smallest possible pocket of air, the space around the human body. Inside that box bed, every breath mattered. Every heartbeat mattered. Your warmth didn't drift across the room and vanish into cold stone. It stayed close. It thickened the air around you. The box bed became a thermal cocoon, a survival pod built from timber and common sense. And then comes the mystery that makes historians pause. Why did so many people sleep half upright inside these beds? At first, it sounds like superstition. And yes, folklore did warn that lying completely flat resembled death, and people carried those beliefs into daily life. But beneath the folklore was something more practical. In smoky, poorly ventilated homes, respiratory illness was everywhere. Tuberculosis and chronic breathing problems weren't rare. They were part of the landscape. Sleeping in a slightly seated position could make breathing easier, especially in air that was thick with soot and dampness. So the box bed wasn't just about warmth, it was about surviving the air itself. And here's what makes this relevant today. We never stopped chasing the same idea. We just changed the branding. Look at Japanese capsule hotels. Look at sensory sleep pods. Look at people building sleep tents indoors or sealing off corners of rooms to create a warmer zone. Humans keep reinventing the same solution because the problem hasn't changed. Drafts don't care about your blanket. Cold air doesn't care about your central heating. What matters is microclimate, your ability to control the air right around your body. That's the lesson the box bed leaves behind. When energy is expensive and winter is ruthless, the smartest strategy is not always more heat. Sometimes the smartest strategy is less space. Part 5. Windows as thermal thieves. In a pre-1950 bedroom, the window was almost always the weak point. The beautiful danger. The place where winter didn't knock. It simply walked in. Because single-pane glass has almost no insulating power. It's not a shield, it's a chilled sheet of transparency, an invitation for heat to leave and cold to return. And our ancestors learned the hard way that you could have a decent bed, a decent blanket, even a decent fire downstairs, and still lose the battle at the window. But what's fascinating is how precise their solution was. They weren't just trying to block cold. They were trying to break a specific physics trap, what we can call the chimney effect at the window. Here's what happens. Warm air from your room drifts toward the glass. The glass is cold, so that air cools instantly, becomes heavier and drops straight down like a curtain of invisible water. As it falls, it pulls more warm air toward the window to replace it. And the loop repeats all night. It's a conveyor belt of heat loss. And if your curtains are loose, you accidentally help the thief. The cold air drops behind the fabric, spills out at the bottom, and flows across your room like a low, silent tide right toward your bed. That's why some nights you feel a mysterious draft, even when every door is shut. It isn't a leak you can hear. It's a loop you can't see. Victorians, however, were masters of invisible fixes. Their answer was not just thicker curtains. Their answer was containment. First came the pelmet, a structured top piece that acts like a hat for the window. It stops warm air from slipping behind the curtain and feeding that cold loop. Then came the lambrequin, a frame that runs down the sides, sealing the edges so the curtain becomes less like decoration and more like a wall. In other words, they boxed the window in. And when the cold was truly vicious, they went even further. They used window quilts, thick, layered blankets hung over the glass at night. Not for beauty, for survival. Done properly, this could dramatically cut the heat bleeding through the pane, sometimes by an astonishing amount. So the lesson for today is simple, and it can save you real money. Don't just hang pretty curtains and hope for the best. If winter is serious where you live, use heavy, lined drapes that reach from near the ceiling down to the floor. Then seal the edges, Velcro, magnets, even tucked fabric, so cold air can't circulate behind them. And just like that, you've created a low-tech version of double glazing, using nothing but cloth, gravity, and old-world thermodynamics. Because when you understand this, you realize the truth. In winter, a window isn't just a view, it's a thermal doorway, and you get to decide whether it stays open. Part 6. The bed as a microfortress, the layering formula. In the age before central heating, the most dangerous moment of the night wasn't sunset. It was the moment the fire went out. Because once the last embers faded, the room didn't just cool down, it changed character. Walls began to steal heat, windows started their draft loops, Floors turned into cold reservoirs, and in that silent shift, the bed became the final line of defense, the one place where warmth could still be engineered. Our ancestors didn't treat bedding like comfort. They treated it like architecture. They built a controlled climate around the body using a layering formula that looks simple, but behaves like a system. First came the foundation, wool, not on top, but placed directly over the mattress, because they understood ground chill rises. Cold doesn't only come from the air, it creeps upward through contact and conduction. Wool, with its trapped air and stubborn resilience, was the barrier that stopped that slow heat theft from below. Then came the comfort layer, cotton or linen. To modern people, it's just a sheet. To them, it was moisture management, because sweat is a biological betrayal in winter. Damp fabric collapses insulation, strips warmth, and turns a cozy bed into a cold trap. Dryness wasn't luxury. Dryness was survival. And finally came the seal, the heavy quilt. This wasn't just weight for comfort. The quilt's job was to press the layers together, reduce air movement, and lock warmth into a stable pocket around the body. It was the lid on the fortress. But the true secret, the part most people forget today, was what I call the tucking principle. A blanket that isn't tucked is just cloth. It leaks heat on every side. Warm air rises, escapes, and gets replaced by colder air slipping in underneath. That's convection doing its work, quietly stealing your warmth without permission. But when you tuck a blanket, when you seal three sides, you don't just feel snug. You change the physics. You trap warm air. You block circulation. You turn bedding into a crude but powerful heating system built from fabric and discipline. And here's what makes this more than nostalgia. Reenactment tests and practical trials show that this old layered method can keep you roughly 2 to 6 degrees Celsius warmer than relying on a single modern synthetic comforter. That's not a tiny difference. That's the difference between waking up at 3 a.m. shivering and sleeping through the night. So if you're cold, don't only chase thickness, chase structure. Add 3 thinner layers instead of 1 massive one, and then seal them like your grandparents did. Tuck them tight, create that microclimate, and let the bed do what it was designed to do for centuries. Not just comfort you, protect you. Part 7. Thermal ballasts, heated stones and bricks. Before they climbed into bed, our ancestors did something we rarely do now. They jump-started the warmth. Because they understood a harsh truth, a cold bed steals heat first. If you get in while the sheets are icy, your body pays the price for the first 30 minutes, sometimes the first hour, burning energy just to raise the temperature of the fabric around you. And in an era when calories were precious and winter nights were long, that was a waste you couldn't afford. So they brought a thermal battery into the bed. In wealthier homes, you might find a copper warming pan filled with hot coals, slid carefully between the sheets to chase away the frost. It sounds luxurious, almost theatrical, but it was pure physics, preheating the microclimate so the body didn't have to. But for the average family, the true king of the bedroom wasn't copper. It was stone, the soapstone brick. They would heat a brick in the oven or on the stove for a few minutes, wrap it in a towel so it wouldn't scorch the linen, and then place it at the foot of the bed, right where circulation is weakest and cold loves to attack first. And then something almost magical would happen. The bed would stop feeling like an enemy. The sheets would soften. The air under the covers would warm. Your body could relax instead of fighting. Soapstone holds heat for an astonishingly long time, often well into the night, sometimes until morning, because it releases warmth slowly and steadily, like a controlled fire with no flame. It's thermal ballast, weight that stabilizes temperature and keeps the system from crashing. And history always has one more strange detail hiding in the shadows. There are accounts of travelers in horse-drawn wagons who, in extreme cold, would put manure on the floor and cover their legs with blankets. Not for comfort, for survival. As it decomposed, it released heat, just enough to keep people from freezing on brutal roads. It's a grim kind of ingenuity, but it proves the point. Humans have always hunted for portable warmth, and thankfully, we don't have to go that far. Because the lesson today is simple: preheat the bed, not the whole house. A hot water bottle, a heated stone, a microwavable heat pack, anything safe and sealed, placed near the feet, can turn a cold bed into a warm refuge without cranking the thermostat. In winter, that first burst of warmth isn't a luxury, it's a strategy. Part 8. Scarcity Ingenuity, the newspaper hack. When money disappeared, people didn't stop needing warmth. They just stopped being able to buy it. And that's why the Great Depression and the years of World War II produced a different kind of invention. Not the glamorous kind, not the patented kind, but the kind born in kitchens and basements, made from whatever was on hand. Scarcity doesn't just change what you own, scarcity changes how you think. If you strip the walls of an old 1920s home today, you might find something that feels like a time capsule of desperation. Hundreds of crumpled newspapers, sometimes dated decades ago, stuffed between the studs. Not because someone was hoarding headlines, because paper was insulation. Newspaper is made from wood pulp, and wood pulp traps air. And trapped air, when it can't circulate, becomes a barrier against cold. So families did what they had to do. They packed paper into empty cavities to slow heat loss. They filled gaps to smother drafts. They turned yesterday's news into tomorrow's survival. And they didn't stop at stuffing. Some people took newspapers and pasted overlapping layers directly onto interior walls before wallpaper went up, like crude shingles, one on top of another, using nothing but a simple flour and water paste. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't modern, but it sealed the tiny cracks where wind loved to sneak in and steal warmth, one invisible thread at a time. Then came the attack on the next weak point, the door. Because under most doors, there's a gap, small enough to ignore, big enough for cold air to pour through like a low river. So they made what we now call door snakes. Fabric tubes stuffed with whatever they could spare, sawdust, sand, dried beans, then laid them along the bottom seam to block that creeping draft. It's almost laughably simple, until you feel the difference. And that's the lesson for today. You don't always need expensive upgrades to make a room warmer. Sometimes you need to hunt the drafts like your grandparents did and seal them with the cheapest materials on earth. A draft stopper, a heavier seal at the bottom of the door, a temporary layer on a problem wall. These are low-cost moves that can reduce heat loss far more than people expect. Because when you're fighting winter, comfort isn't always bought. Sometimes it's engineered, from scraps. Part 9. Conclusion. Resilience is in our DNA. Picture the final scene, a small bedroom, dimly lit, quiet and calm. The kind of warmth that feels earned, not purchased. And then the camera slowly pulls back, past the curtains, past the window, until the view opens into a modern city, glowing with lights that promise comfort at the touch of a button. The wind outside fades, replaced by soft, steady music, and in that contrast, the lesson becomes clear. Our ancestors lived through winters harsher than most of us will ever face. They didn't survive because they had better technology. They survived because they had better instincts. They understood how heat moves the way sailors understand tides. They knew where warmth leaks, where cold pools, where drafts hunt, and where a human body can be defended. To them, warmth was never an accident. It was a discipline. It was a ritual. Somewhere along the way, cheap energy made these rules feel optional. We stopped thinking like engineers and started thinking like consumers. If we felt cold, we didn't adjust the system. We simply demanded more heat. But now, as costs rise and the world becomes more unpredictable, this old knowledge stops being nostalgia. It becomes a survival skill again. Not because we want to live like the past, but because the past still understands the physics we live inside every night. So here's my challenge to you tonight. Walk through your bedroom the way your grandparents would. Move slowly. Feel the air. Stand near the walls and notice the temperature change on your skin. Find the silent drafts that slip under doors and down glass. And ask yourself one honest question. Are you sleeping where your bed looks best, or where it works best? Because the difference is rarely dramatic. It's a few inches of separation from an exterior wall. It's elevation that lifts you out of the cold air lake. It's a blanket tucked like a seal instead of draped like decoration. It's a heavy curtain that stops a window from becoming a thermal thief. Small choices that remember what warmth really is. If you learned something new today, subscribe to Historia Prime for more journeys into the practical genius of the past. Stay warm, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next episode.